All right, I think we're ready to go here. Thank you for joining us live today. My name is John. This is Bella. Hello, Bella. How are you?
I'm good.
Excellent. We're meeting for this is actually the the first if we look at our lunar calendar, this is the first meeting of the second quarter since we began our lunar alchemy experiment, so to speak, where the first session of lunar alchemy happened way back around the time of Easter and the spring equinox. Well, now we've crossed the summer solstice, and this is our first session since then, and we have a full moon coming up in just a couple of days. So lots of stuff going on right now to integrate and be aware of. So I'm excited to be discussing tonight's tonight's topic, which is the shadow of dullness, coming from gene key 15, which is the gate where the sun is currently passing through. And but I suspect that there's so many things going on right now in the skies and internally within us that we'll have plenty to talk about, even if we don't get too deeply into the dullness, because we want to keep this discussion interesting. So, Bella, take it away. Tell me what's on your mind about what's going on right now, because there's so many different things we could focus on.
Yeah, I did a video yesterday about the solstice, and when I looked at the chart, I think there were four planets in water signs and in different water signs. So Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And it really felt yesterday like there were emotions and all kinds of emotions because those different signs have different qualities. So Cancer is more nurturing, and that's what we feel with the sun having just gone into Cancer. We feel this nurturing, this harvest time. Also, Cancer has to do with family. But the moon yesterday was in Scorpio, and that is like going deep and dying and getting reborn, and the secrets of all that intensity of emotion. And then Neptune and even Jupiter were in Pisces, which is the spiritual part of how we feel and how we feel beyond things, and a bit of that poetry also, the way that we can take the feelings that are, or the emotions that are difficult, and we can make music or poetry in the world with it. So I could feel that very much yesterday. And I feel like there is a little bit of a different energy coming in with the full moon in Capricorn. That's a little bit of a Capricorn is not a very emotional sign at all. It's the earth sign, and it's kind of responsible. So it's always interesting once a year when we have a full moon in Capricorn. And also Venus is moving out of Cancer into Leo, joining Mars there. So there's something with that feminine, masculine, that balance in our everyday life that is going to move into the sign of leadership is what I feel. So I feel it's a lot of things are changing right now. So I don't feel like necessarily the energy was there in the beginning of the week. It's going to be similar to what's coming with the full moon and where we're moving into.
So we're in the middle of a dynamic period where the influences are highlighting different aspects of our experience, and those highlighted aspects are changing quickly. So, if we're in a state of awareness of what's going on inside and we're able to pay attention to things like our thoughts, our emotions, we can feel these movements happening as kind of a sporadic, impulsive experience, where we may suddenly have a new emotion arise or a new thought that doesn't really seem to pertain to what we're placing our attention on necessarily. And it can lead to an experience of distractedness, which, interestingly, when we look at where the sun is, By the way, solstice is the moment, at least in the northern hemisphere in the summertime, when the sun is at its apex, meaning we have the greatest number of hours of daylight that we're going to have the entire year. And that was just yesterday. So this sort of maximum level of solar power is shining to us through this gateway of the 15, which is this movement from dullness into magnetism into the city of Florescence, which I love this term because it's like the ultimate flowering of human experience when consciousness can reach a zenith, an apex. It's the perfect moment to happen for where humanity is at in consciousness right now at the solstice, because it really highlights our capacity to move into another realm of awareness. And what Bella was just talking about, and in terms of this sort of possibility of finding all of these internal movements that can be a little bit decentering, when we look at the shadow of dullness, one of the ways that shows up in our experience as a reactive quality when we are reactive to that is, while it's titled extremism from the gene keys, it's really this process of denial where activity is constantly on the move, constantly in a state of dynamism that allows you to ignore the dullness, the ordinariness, the reality of what it means to live on planet Earth in a body in the world that we live in. And by constantly moving on to the next and the next and the next and the next, we can use our attention to ignore an underlying experience that can feel extraordinarily harmful for us from a certain perspective. So to me, it's just always interesting to see how these gates just absolutely line up with, the movements of the planets in our solar system are different every year. The next time we get to June 22nd, the planets are not going to be in the same place, but here we are with this flavor of the gate that the sun is in really being in harmony with the planets that are around us.
Yeah, I thought I was going to show the astrological wheel. We can look at a few
Yeah.
more things that have to do with the moon. And then I do want to speak a little bit about the qualities of the 15, but I feel like I want to start just looking at the sky. So as we always do on Tuesdays, we are looking at the astrological wheel, which is basically just from Earth. If you look at the sky, you're going to have all the different astrological signs, and the planets are going to be somewhere in the sky. And when I was looking now, I thought it was interesting because the moon is moving fast. The moon is not moving around the sun, it's moving around the earth. So when we look here, we have the south node together with the moon. They are together. And I would say, the moon is really on an everyday basis. It's kind of the tide that is pulling us, it's pulling the water of the earth. And we are 70% of water. So it's like also pulling us, and water stands for emotions. So what I feel here, so Sagittarius is about expansion, it's that fire, that, that arrow that goes. And at the same time, we have Jupiter that went into retrograde on Sunday, I believe, in gate 55. Gate 55 goes from victimization to freedom. And in Pisces, that has to do with also spiritual expansion. So there's something here about, the wild woman is more about naturalness. So I would say, and naturalness in terms of nature of Mother Earth. And I believe that Mother Earth, she's very down to earth. Like she's she's grounded and she's going to ground us. So when I look at the chart right now and I see the south node and the moon together here in Sagittarius, and I see Jupiter in the 55 in retrograde, I'm wondering, I'm saying it's not a time to be overly optimistic, because that can happen with Sagittarius and with Jupiter. It's like, oh, expansion, it's everything is perfect. That's going to be okay. That's going to be okay. That's going to be okay. And not actually really looking at the truth of how things are. And retrograde means reevaluation, revisiting. So revisiting the things that are holding us back from our expansion. And maybe it's from our spiritual expansion, or it could be, it could be what in the spiritual realm are holding us back from our personal, professional expansion in life. There's something here where I feel the North Node is saying, be a little bit careful. It's more of this like rational North Node energy of Mercury that says, I want the truth, I want rational, I want to understand, I want to communicate. That feels more like the energy. Also, this is the last day of Mercury retrograde. So I feel like when Mercury is going forward, it's going to be easier to have more clarity, to not go beyond, like to not like run in front of ourselves, but to take this time with Jupiter. What do you need to revisit in your expansion? What patterns might keep you a victim instead of freedom? And how is that connected to your spiritual evolution? That feels like a really important theme with the moon, and maybe even moving into Capricorn, which is about responsibility. So that's something that feels alive. And I would love to hear, John, how you relate to this.
Yeah, when I think about how we are beginning to have the ability to look at the cosmic bodies in this manner of a spiritual perspective, or at least a perspective which is energetic in nature, based on how it is that we're feeling, the impulses that we have, the inspirations that we have, the obstacles that we encounter. When we're looking at this possibility for making new choices, for getting integrated with what is present at a time like now, when our relationship with the sun and moon is at one of its extremes. So in the winter solstice, we'll have a time of the shortest day, where our part of the planet is facing away from the sun and has the minimum amount of sun. I know, Bella, you're very familiar with this, and I'm sure in parts of Sweden, in the summertime, it never gets dark around this time of year. So there's an extremeness to the illumination that is going on. When we examine that extreme degree of influence coming from the sun, we can see the moon as reflecting that, our spiritual nature into our physical natures. So when we're looking at the things of the moon, it's much more clear to see in a female body than in a male body in a lot of ways, because of the cycles for reproduction following along with the movements of the moon in some form or another. Of course, not every woman is going to be in their cycle at the same time on the planet. However, it has been shown that women can align and harmonize with the movements of the moon. Likewise, in our experience of agriculture on the planet, the birth of new life, the creation of plant life, of food, has historically and traditionally been done with cycles of the moon, when the energies of the earth are our right to provide life to the seeds that we plant, right? So when we're looking at this idea of what Bella's kind of talking about in terms of where's the moon right now in Sagittarius and what's going on with a Jupiter retrograde and the possibility for experiencing expansion or maybe revisiting that which is holding us back from further expansion in our spiritual experience. The positioning of the moon in relationship to everything kind of gives me an idea of how it is that we can relate to our physical bodies. How can we treat the impulses that are coming to us in our physical bodies? The impulse to sleep, the impulse to eat, the impulse to rest, the impulse to create. Many of these things go through a lot of different shifts as the moon is going into different parts of the sky. And so for me, looking at, the moon moves so quickly, within another day, the moon won't be in Sagittarius much anymore. It'll move out onto the next phase that it's moving toward. Oftentimes that movement is too fast for us to receive a full influence. However, the energies of the sun are reflected off of the moon. And by the way, the moon is rising and setting during the daytime, at least in the United States at this time. So during the day, you can actually, when it gets to around this time, you can look up in the sky and see the moon. And by the time night falls, it's going to be dark in the sky. So the moon is going along with the sun to a certain degree. So what we're having is a reflection of these solar energies of gate 15 off of this sort of momentary positioning of the moon. And the moon is like this reflection of, okay, how is this affecting our body? And so when we're seeing the moon maybe in Sagittarius and this movement of Jupiter in Pisces, this can suggest that it may be a good time to focus on the really solid three-dimensional matters that are going on in our lives, rather than getting lost in the intellectual, spiritual possibilities of what we could become, or what our possibilities are. So taking care of agreements that are made between people, taking care of the things that are important to our everyday physical lives, the things that are part of our daily rhythms. This is a time where focusing on those things in particular and just getting them into a place where we can feel comfortable and can feel our own well-being can be extraordinarily beneficial.
Yeah, there is something when you speak about impulse and those rhythms, when we speak about the wild woman, which is the name that we chose for the archetype this week, and she really needs to be free. Like the earth, Mother Earth, sometimes she needs to have a hurricane, and sometimes she wants to have like warm and hot and no rain for a long time. That's what the wild woman is about, and it's actually part in human design of collective circuitry, because it's seeing all the extremes in in not only in behavior, like the extremes also in modes of being in psychology. It's looking at all these extremes, and then it's, you know, kind of feeling into, for humanity, for the collective, how can we come back to modesty, you know, to the golden middle way that is working. And it's about the future, it's about improvements, it's about the generations that are coming. But at the same time, when we just look at this archetype, I feel like it's a bit a joker in that circuitry that we say it's logical understanding circuitry, and it has to do with the collective and the future. And I look at this wild woman, I'm like, it's funny that she ended up there, because when I look at her, she's so free, and she's made up of, in the I Ching, the element of earth, so very feminine, and the element of mountain. And the element of mountain is what makes up the archetype of stillness. So it's very yin, it's very inward, it's very, like you're saying, it's finding, it's going back within and finding groundedness. It's not necessarily going out to spirit or to, you know, it's not going out, it's coming in to the groundedness of the mountain, of the earth, of the feminine, of the form. So it's finding home in the form. And at the same time, as we say, Mother Earth, she doesn't only have one expression. She has many different expressions, and she loves to taste, you know. And it's not that every year on June 22nd it's going to be the same weather, kind of what you were saying with the solstice. And that's the beauty of this archetype, that it has this freedom. And that's also why it's not judging others. It's a very allowing in that sense. It can see the extremes, and that doesn't mean I'm not going to love you. And we know that the archetype that has two elements of earth, the element of earth twice, which is the feminine, that is only yin, you know, it's very all embracing. It's so much about unity. So there's a similar feeling with this one, and it feels it goes very well together also with the feminine. It has a little bit more, it's existential. So it has a little bit more, it connects into the fifth archetype, which we call the drummer, which is about fixed rhythm in life. So on one side, from the actually, let me share again. From one side, from the sacral center, we have the 5, which is that energy from the sacral pointing up. And then we have the wild woman archetype coming down from the G center, that's more existential. So she's going to taste on like all different weathers, all different extremes in a way. And then we have the drummer on the other side, that is very much, you know, whatever rhythm it is a rhythm. So it's those two archetypes that come together. And I mean, I see, especially when it comes to the tantric channels, the one that goes between the G and the sacral, I see those archetypes like lovers. So I see the more masculine, the 5, that can have that rhythm and that more like kind of masculine focus of beating the drum. And then the feminine that comes and say, well, today's raining, you know, today is sunny. And then when they come together, they create this aliveness, which is the life force being circulated up to the heart, to the identity. What is love? Where are we going? Who am I? And for me, all these channels are very, very powerful. But there's something powerful with the 515, and I have several people in my life with this channel, and it's always like they have a very strong beat in a way, and it's very difficult to push them out of that beat. They are gonna, since it's collective circuitry, they're gonna more be kind of pull you into their rhythm, and you might not feel until later that you are kind of in some rhythm that might be extreme or might not be good for you. It's very kind of just pulling you in. So knowing if you have the 15, if you have the 5, if you have the whole channel in your life, you are contagious in that sense. And whatever you are on beat or off beat, it's going to have an influence on people around you. So being aware of that and check yourself, you know, it's sometimes it's a fine line when you are, you know, when you are in balance and when you're out of balance. So that's a few things that I feel are interesting with this archetype.
Yeah, I personally relate to that. I have the 15-5 channel, and 15 is my SQ. So, which that's a pattern that begins in childhood, and then oftentimes you can kind of find your way back to that degree of childhood innocence through whatever gene key happens to inhabit that particular place on your path, if that's part of your sequencing. um, and for me, the more I tend to find the 15 as a somewhat more um, that exists as a more abstract experience for me, whereas the 5 is a very down to earth experience for me, even though both of those two gates are intimately tied in with the energies of the earth. And when so I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with this shadow frequency and the gift, and maybe even the city a little bit for 15, just because the experience of the 15 is essentially wanting to avoid the rhythms of life. So when you're in shadow of the 15, it's almost like you'll do anything to prevent that channel of rhythm from being completed. You don't want to face the fact that you got to brush your teeth every day and take out the garbage and do all the mundane things. My life has been to a large degree driven by, to some degree, some avoidance of that, as well as to another degree of absolute acceptance and integration of the necessity of that experience. And um, usually I tend to find that when you're able to go more deeply into that 15 gate, that experience of dullness, when you embrace it without resistance, it's one of the experience that I find that is easiest to fully transform into a different experience by going deeper into it. And I think the reason for that is because the pain that we experience in that shadow frequency is not an acute one that manifests directly into our physical body. It's this sort of like wide malaise that manifests into depression over time. And I'm not suggesting that if someone is feeling depressed, they should, like feel more deeply into how much more depressed can they get. But essentially, one of the things that holds the depression in place is the resistance to the experience itself. And as long as we're in direct opposition to the experience that we're having, it makes it very challenging for that experience to transform into something new, which, by the way, according, the I Ching, what we're doing here in Lunar Alchemy, everything that we know from an esoteric science is essentially that nothing stays the same. Everything changes, everything transforms. And when we're in a human body and something isn't changing, that's because we're doing something that's preventing it from allowing its natural rhythm to occur. So, for me, I would definitely say that my in my life I've had many, many times as an adult where I felt I was prone to experiences of depression. But I never really I never really related to it as an affliction that was happening to me. It was more of just how I was relating to the environment that surrounds me. And if I was able to change that relationship in some way, then my experience of that environment would fundamentally shift into something new and different, and I would experience something different. So to me, that really feels, if we're looking at like if we're looking at like how do you transform this experience of shadow into something different, it's like this attitude of non-resistance to what has already occurred and an openness to what will become, as that transformation takes place naturally. So, Bella, I'm curious if you have a perspective about that idea in terms of like whether it's the archetypes or you know
I feel this quality of the existential again, because when you speak about the 15, which is the G center gate, which is that identity, the love, the direction, very existential, me, or the, me, or the self, the bigger self, in a sense, I really relate both with my first gene key and my second gene key, my life's work and my evolution, to what you're saying, because both of them have that same quality, either of, it's a resistance, and it's a resistance to feel the depression or like the void, by being frenetic or regimented, which is more like you doing something, or the kind of, in a way a collapse, the depression, but it's all that, like, it's also resistant to move at all. We all know that depression is paralyzing in a way, like you don't want to, it's a paralyzation that it feels like it doesn't allow you to have the rhythm going again, like it's like you can't even do it. And yeah, I feel there is something with the G center where what you're saying is inherent. And I also feel, when we speak about the shadow, the dullness, the word, I feel a little bit like it's not even, we have spoken in other conversations about existential despair, I think is the term that I've been using. And there is something with dullness that to me doesn't give justice to the shadow of the 15, and you have it in your SQ. So when you have had to face some of the imprinting from your childhood, I feel like you might say the same thing. And so when we go to the repressive and the reactive, extremes is the reactive, and I think hollow, empty hollow is the repressive. And that's where I can feel it more. I can feel those extremes of like kind of going on a bike that goes so fast, because, and it's that kind of almost manic, in a way. It can get really extreme. So you're like, oh my God. I'm like, I remember I was really in a place, not in a good place at all, like 7-8 years ago. And I was going down a hill on my bike with no helmet, with nothing, in Sweden. And it was so fast, and I hadn't slept in days, basically. And I was like, this is insane. Like, this is really extreme. I could feel it. I don't have the 15, but I could feel that. And then, so that feeling, and then the hollow or empty feeling, it's like when you can't even feel the rhythm of life in yourself, you can't even feel your life force, you can't feel your purpose, you can't feel that groundedness to the earth. Somebody says human resonance, and you just want to like kill them. It's like, it's that thing of like feeling not alive. You're just a shell of what you were. And it's almost like that existential despair when you say to God or the universe, like, God, why have you forsaken me? Like, why do I have to live? If this is life, it's not worth it. Which is the repressive of those G center gates. And I'm almost prone to go as far as saying, because I was feeling in this week, we were doing in Portals of Deconditioning, where you've been with us as well, John. There was a video that Kat Benson did, and it was about ego deaths as opposed to soul purification, speaking about the 12th gene key, which is the last gene key, the Ring of Secrets. The last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So there's a lot of terms, but basically that last letter after the 21 letters, of course, it's going to be deep. And I really, really resonated with what she was saying, because one thing is ego death, but since ego mind is just an idea, when it kind of like you have to when it pops, you have to face it. But since it's just an idea, there is no residue of it. It's just an idea. It pops, and then you're like on the other side. When it comes to soul purification, the soul has to do with the form, with the body, with the heart. So when you come into a phase of soul purification, which I don't think is the same thing as depression, that can be maybe one nuance of it, but it's something deeper. It's the form, and the form takes 7 years of changing all our cells. So I can feel the crack of that despair that went into extremes, that went into being hollow, like, and everything there in between. I can feel the residue of that still. And it's not until 7 years later, when it feels like my soul has integrated again, that I can look back on that and say, there, in some way it made sense. In some way there was a purpose. Because during all this time, the disintegration, like it was too much to hold. I feel like the soul is something different. Like the soul is something the mind can't hold, and the soul is something that the heart has to learn to expand enough to be able to hold. And the heart can hold pain, it can hold darkness, and it can hold light and love. It can hold everything. There's nothing that the heart can't hold. But there's almost like we have a little bit of a misunderstanding, maybe coming from it from an ego center perspective, a bit more like the separated I, and coming into the self, like that magnetic monopole that is, the totality of our existence, both individual and collective. And I know that this is a little bit out there, but it feels like the 15 is asking us to kind of go a bit far away with it and look at these existential, pulls that are working on us, whether we want to admit it or not.
Yeah, I feel like what you're talking about really gets to the heart of the larger role of this 15th gate, which from the perspective of gene keys takes place within the codon rings, which is how the relationship of gene keys to each other manifests into our experience through chemicals and protein synthesis. And this codon ring of seeking, the 15 is at the heart of what drives humanity to seek for something that is greater than the experience, that experience of dullness, whether we're reactive to it or by trying to go as fast as we can on a bike, just like to deny the ordinariness of our experience, or we kind of sink inwardly into this experience of depression where there's nothing in my experience that is worth being present for, and feeling powerless over the circumstances that surround us. Those are the things that tell us from a deep, deep, deep place, there's got to be something more than this. And I feel like when you engage in that process of seeking, it allows you to come into an inner resonance between yourself and the environment that you find yourself in, that begins to produce that degree of magnetism that attracts people from all over the world who want who are also seeking that same degree of experience, and that process of that magnetism is what is described in the sort of new age language as being the light, of sending light to other people, of the whole concept of embodying light and love is really about getting resonant with oneself to allow yourself to become a magnetic source of an inner resonance. Our bodies are made up of the earth. I don't know what you've been eating since you were born, but everything that I've eaten has come out of the planet. Whether it was a plant, a fruit, animals, whatever you're eating, it's sourced from the earth. So our whole body is really, that old saying, or the old myth about humanity being created out of mud. If you kind of like interpret that humanity being created out of earth, it just means that our physical presence is an earthly one. And and there's this element to humanity that is from beyond the planet. And so when we're looking at this possibility, gate 15 takes you from, okay, what is this low frequency experience of being earthly, to fluorescence, which is this like profound flowering of everything. It's just like magnetism gone wild with brilliance and exuberance of life expression. And when that occurs in another human being, it's impossible not to notice. Even at the level of magnetism, you cannot help noticing those people. If you walk into a room, you just zhoop, your attention is going to be pulled there. So, Bella, everything that you're talking about there just feels like it's you're speaking directly to the source of that that base of the seeking of humanity for this expansion of experience.
Yeah, and there is something with that codon ring where we have a lot of root gates. So that seeking is not a mental seeking; it's a pressure
Right.
that is there, and very much like a seed, which has so much to do with this 15th gene key, because it's the word fluorescence, and it's the harvest time of Cancer. So it's more an inherent pressure to evolve, to fly, to flourish, and also the uniqueness of having a cherry blossom tree or an apple tree. And in the spring there's all these flowers that come out. It's almost, you don't see the green leaves of the tree, you just see the white flowers. But there are not two flowers that are the same, and all the flowers are accepting of each other, that of their own beautiful magnetism of each little flower. So that for me is very much the acidic frequency, and also this inherent seed that wants to become something more. And also the acidic frequency for me is that in everything and anything has to eventually transcend its own form. That's what we're going to see more in, for example, the 53 that we're going to be in a few weeks. It's something that has to do with that whole codon ring. So I love how you brought it in and made it more tangible to understand the codon ring as well.
Yeah, thank you for that reflection and bringing it in line with the solstice time, because this is the time of the earth when all of the energy that the earth can provide to for new plant life, in terms of our agricultural experience, in terms of plants blooming, the beginning of the fruits of the movement of the year, is right here at the zenith of the movement of the sun. The earth's full energies has been expressed out into the world, and it's just going to flower across the rest of this summer until we get to that harvest time. So, for those of you on Facebook, thanks for joining our discussion on Lunar Alchemy with Bella. And you can go ahead and comment below if we're going to continue on with our Lunar Alchemy members here and go into a quantum healing transmission that is going to assist with the process of alchemizing any of the shadow frequencies that are present in our bodies at this time. And when you are out of resonance with the planetary pulse, the planetary rhythm of life, that's really the basis of when disease begins to manifest in the body. And we can look at that at any number of levels: emotional, mental, spiritual. So that can manifest in a lot of different ways in our lives. But we're going to move on in that direction. Just comment that you might be interested in checking that out, and we'll respond to you on an individual basis. Let's see, how do I do this? There we go. I feel like I have to learn how to do this every time. All right, Facebook. See you next time. So yeah, so Bella, this